After driving 6 hours through a blizzard to make it to Christmas dinner, I walked in soaked, shivering and empty-handed because I'd left the gifts in the car. My sister looked me up and down and said, "You're not even dressed for dinner. Do you think we're just some motel?" My mom whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some people show up for free food and pity." I sat in silence while they passed around plates without me. 2 hours later, I found my jacket in the trash and my car tires slashed. A cousin filmed it all and posted it. The caption said, "Freeloader Holiday Special." Yesterday, that same cousin called me begging for help. Last Christmas is one I'll never forget, and not for any good reason. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how my own family could treat me the way they did. Maybe telling this will help me finally get it out of my system. It all started when I decided to make the 6-hour drive from Pittsburgh to my sister's house in upstate New York. The weather had been rough all week, but Christmas was Christmas. Family mattered, right? So I packed up the car with all the gifts I had bought, wrapped carefully over weeks, and hit the road early in the morning. The snow started halfway through Pennsylvania. By the time I hit New York, it was full-on whiteout conditions. I could barely see the car in front of me. I should have turned back. Anyone with half a brain would have. But I kept telling myself they're waiting. They'll be happy I made the effort. I didn't even stop to eat. Just coffee from a gas station, barely warm. By the time I pulled into her driveway, it was dark. The wind cut through my coat like it wasn't even there. I grabbed my phone and keys, but I left the gifts in the back seat because I didn't want to juggle everything in the storm. I figured I'd come back for them after I said hi. Big mistake. I opened the door, stepped inside, and instantly the warm air hit me. The smell of roast turkey and pies made my stomach rumble. I hadn't eaten all day. I must have looked like hell, wet hair, red nose, soaked jeans sticking to my legs. Everyone was gathered around the dining table, laughing, drinking like something out of a cheesy Christmas movie. My sister, Marcy, looked me up and down, sneered like I was something she stepped in, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "You're not even dressed for dinner. Do you think we're just some motel?" The room got quiet. Some people chuckled under their breath. Before I could even take my coat off, my mom leaned over to my aunt and said in a stage whisper, "Some people show up for free food and pity." I froze. I could feel all the eyes on me. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I thought about explaining, about telling them the drive had been a nightmare, that I'd left the gifts outside because I was soaked to the bone. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Once their minds were made up, that was it. I sat down at the corner of the living room, away from the table, still shivering. They started passing plates around without even offering me a seat. I watched them eat, laugh, toast. I sat there with my wet clothes clinging to me like a second skin, stomach growling loud enough to hear over the holiday music. Nobody said a word to me. Not even when I finally got up, found a dry spot on the floor near the heater, and tried to warm up. 2 hours I sat there. 2 hours of pretending I wasn't hurt, pretending I didn't care. When I finally decided to sneak out to the car and grab the presents, maybe salvage something from the night, I found my jacket in the trash can outside. Not on a chair, not hung up somewhere, but stuffed into a dirty trash bag with beer bottles and soggy paper plates. And my car? Someone had slashed all 4 of my tires. Not just a slow leak, but full-on destroyed them. The snow around my car was stained black with rubber and slush. I stood there, just staring, when I heard laughing behind me. I turned around, and there was my cousin Brian, phone out, filming me. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Just standing there, grinning like an idiot, capturing every second of my humiliation. Later that night, he posted the video on Facebook. Captioned it, "Freeloader Holiday Special." Full video of me standing by my busted car like an idiot, soaking wet, in ripped jeans and a half-soaked hoodie, while my family laughed in the background. It went semi-viral among the local crowd. Old classmates, neighbors, even some coworkers ended up seeing it. People I'd barely spoken to in years started messaging me fake sympathy or, Worse jokes. I stopped answering my phone. I locked my social media. I just wanted to disappear. I called a tow truck at midnight and sat in my dead car for 2 hours until they arrived. I had to pay out of pocket for new tires because nobody was willing to fess up to doing it. Insurance wouldn't cover vandalism without proof. I had no proof. That night, I made a decision. I was done with them. No more calls. No more birthdays. No more family holidays. Fast forward to yesterday. I'm sitting on my couch, minding my own business, when my phone lights up. It's Brian. I stared at it for a while, debating whether to even answer. Finally, curiosity won. I picked up. He was sobbing. Actually crying. Turns out he got into some kind of bad situation, money troubles, legal issues, something big enough to have him sweating bullets. He started off with small talk, pretending like nothing had happened, like we were best buddies. I let him ramble for a bit before he finally got to it. He needed a place to crash for a few weeks. Somewhere safe. Somewhere no one would think to look for him. Apparently, burning all your bridges leaves you with few places to go. He actually said, and I quote, we're family. Family helps each other out. I swear, I almost laughed right into the phone. The same family that left me outside in a blizzard, that trashed my jacket, that destroyed my car, that turned me into a meme for their amusement, now needed me to save his sorry ass. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, real calm, sorry man. This isn't a motel. Then I hung up. My hands were shaking after. Not from anger. From adrenaline. From relief. I'm not the same person I was last Christmas. That night broke something in me, but it also set me free. Brian kept calling. Left voicemails. Texted. Even had the nerve to send me an old photo of us as kids with some sob story about how things were different back then. I didn't answer. Let him figure it out on his own. Funny thing about bridges, you never know how much you need them until they're already ashes at your feet. A few days after I ignored Brian's call, things started getting weird. First, it was little things. Someone tried to reset my email password. Then I noticed weird scratches on the side of my new car. I thought maybe it was a coincidence, maybe just bad luck following me like a stray dog. But then my landlord called. Said someone had been snooping around the building, asking questions about me. Asking if I lived alone, if I worked nights, if I had visitors. My landlord's not the type to care much, but even he thought it was odd enough to warn me. I knew it wasn't random. It was Brian. I guess he figured if begging didn't work, creeping around would. Maybe he thought he could guilt me, scare me, or just force his way into my life again. Typical for someone who thinks consequences are just things that happen to other people. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off, just watching the street. Snow was falling again, just like it had on that awful Christmas. Everything looked quiet. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Around midnight, I saw headlights slowly roll past my building. A beat-up old truck, engine rumbling too loud for how slow it was going. I watched it crawl by once, then circle the block, then come back again. It parked across the street. Someone sat inside, engine idling. I sat there in the dark, heart hammering in my chest, phone clutched in my hand. I thought about calling the cops, but what would I even say? Hey, there's a truck outside and I feel creeped out? They'd laugh me off the phone. So I waited. About half an hour later, the truck finally drove off. The next morning, I found footprints in the snow right up to my building's door. Not just the front door, either the side entrance too. Someone had walked around, trying every entrance. And in the snow, smeared on the side of the building with a greasy finger, were the words, "Family sticks together." I swear my blood ran cold. This wasn't just desperate. It was deranged. I realized then that Brian wasn't just looking for a place to crash. He was trying to drag me back into their mess, like quicksand. If I gave an inch, he'd take everything. So I did what I had to do. I installed cameras around my apartment. I talked to my landlord and got the locks changed. I even started parking my car a few blocks away, just to be safe. I didn't tell anyone where I lived now, not coworkers, not neighbors, no one. Meanwhile, Brian kept calling. Different numbers. Burner phones. Block 1, another popped up like a weed. Always the same pathetic voicemails. Begging, crying, promising he'd make it right, whatever that meant. I knew better. One night, about a week later, right after a heavy snowstorm, there was a knock at my door. Not a polite knock either, a hard, frantic banging that rattled the frame. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops, and quietly looked through the peephole. It was Brian. Or what was left of him. He looked terrible. Face bruised, jacket torn, one eye swollen half shut. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he was being chased. His breath came out in ragged puffs in the cold air. He wasn't just desperate anymore. He was scared. And for one awful second, I almost felt bad for him. He started whispering through the door, voice hoarse and cracking. "They're after me," he said. "I messed up, man. You gotta help me. Please." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "They're gonna kill me," he said. "Please, please, just let me in." He started crying, real gut-wrenching sobs, sliding down to sit against my door like he couldn't even stand anymore. I had a choice: open the door and let whatever mess he dragged in crash into my life, or stay silent and let him deal with the hell he created. And then, just as suddenly, headlights flashed across the street. A big black SUV pulled up, tires screeching against the packed snow. 3 men jumped out. Big guys. Dressed in heavy coats, moving fast, like they knew exactly what they were doing. Brian saw them and panicked, scrambling to his feet and pounding on my door like his life depended on it. "Please," he screamed. "Please open the door. I'm begging you." I could hear the men yelling now, their boots crunching in the snow as they crossed the street toward us. And still, I stood there, frozen, watching, listening, feeling the whole world slow down, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. Brian's fists slammed harder against the door, his voice cracking into pure panic. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The 3 men were at the bottom of my steps now, spreading out like they'd done this before. I backed away from the door, slow and quiet. I had a stupid, crazy thought: maybe if I stayed still enough, they'd just take him and go. Through the peephole, I watched 2 of them grab Brian. He fought like hell, screaming, kicking, twisting like a fish on a hook. One of them punched him in the stomach so hard he folded like a cheap chair. Then something happened that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. One of the men pulled a phone from his pocket, not his own, and pressed it against Brian's face. Brian stopped fighting. Instantly. Like someone had flipped a switch. I squinted through the peephole, heart hammering against my ribs. The screen on the phone was lit up. It was a photo. A photo of me. Me, standing at my window. Me, right now. One of them had been watching me. Not just tonight, maybe for days. They hadn't come just for Brian. They knew where I was. They knew what I looked like. And worse, now they knew I was inside, alone, watching. I dropped to the floor, out of sight. My mind raced. I didn't know what these men wanted from Brian, but it sure as hell wasn't something I wanted to get caught up in. Brian kept whimpering, but quieter now. Broken, defeated. One of the men banged on the door. Not hard, just a solid thud, like a warning. Then, all at once, they dragged Brian back to the SUV. As they shoved him inside, one of them turned and stared up at my window. Not waving, not smiling, just staring. Like he was making sure I understood something very clear. This isn't over. The SUV peeled out, throwing slush onto the sidewalk. And, just like that, they were gone. I sat there on the floor for what felt like hours, heart racing, mind buzzing with 1,000 awful possibilities. Finally, when I was sure they weren't coming back, I crept over to the door. Taped to the bottom of it, with gray duct tape and a strip of something dark and sticky, was a piece of paper. 3 words, written in thick black marker, "You're next." I ripped it down with shaking hands and stuffed it in the trash. I knew then that Brian's problems had just become my problems, whether I wanted them or not. I thought about calling the cops again, but what was I going to tell them? Some thugs roughed up my cousin and left me a creepy note? No broken window, no forced entry, no real proof. I could already hear the bored voice of the 911 dispatcher in my head. Instead, I called an old friend of mine from high school, Mike, who worked private security now. Mike showed up an hour later, still in his work boots, and listened to everything while sipping the cheap coffee I made. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, serious as a heart attack. "You're not dealing with random punks," he said. "This is organized. This is personal." I asked what he meant. He told me about a crew in Buffalo, some low-level criminals who ran scams and loan sharking schemes around New York State. Word was they were expanding into Pittsburgh and Philly now too. Real nasty types. They didn't bother with court papers or polite threats. If you owed, they came for you. If you hid, they made an example out of whoever helped you. Mike leaned in close. "Brian didn't just owe money," he said. "He made promises to people he couldn't keep. And when that happens in their world, it ain't just about money anymore. It's about showing everybody else what happens when you screw them." I stared at him, feeling sick to my stomach. Brian had dragged me into a death sentence. And he knew it. The worst part was, he probably figured if he ran to me, they'd be too scared to cause a scene. Hide behind the idea of family like it would save him. I wasn't just angry now. I was furious. Mike told me he could set me up somewhere safe, temporary. A place to lay low while I figured out the next move. I agreed without thinking twice. Before I left, I smashed my phone and ditched it in a storm drain. Bought a burner at a grimy little shop 3 towns over. Changed everything, my clothes, my car, even my routine. I became invisible. Or at least, I tried to. The first week in hiding was quiet. Too quiet. No calls, no strange cars outside, no men pounding on the door at midnight. But on the 8th night, as I sat alone in the dusty little rental Mike had found, the burner phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it for a long minute before answering. A voice, deep and calm, spoke on the other end. "You can run," the man said. "But you can't hide family." Then the line went dead. No threat. No demand. Just that. A cold promise. I tossed the phone onto the couch and sat there, breathing hard, mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After that call, I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside felt like a threat. Every creak in the floorboards made me jump. I started sleeping with a bat next to my bed and a chair jammed under the doorknob. I lived like a scared animal, always half ready to run. Days turned into weeks. Mike checked in sometimes, but even he sounded nervous now. He told me straight. "If they want you bad enough, hiding isn't going to work forever. You'll have to deal with this another way." I thought about going to the cops, turning Brian in. But I knew enough to know the cops wouldn't protect me when it mattered. They'd take a report, shrug, and then what? These men didn't leave paper trails. I needed to be smarter. I needed to end it. So I made a decision. If Brian had dragged me into this mess, Brian was going to be the one to pull me out. The next day, I went digging. I called in favors. Old friends, old enemies. I pieced together bits of information Brian had hidden. Turns out, he wasn't just running from debt. He had stolen something from these men. Something bad enough they were willing to cross state lines to hunt him down. Cash, drugs, maybe worse, nobody knew for sure. But one thing was clear. They didn't just want repayment. They wanted blood. I tracked down Brian through a guy he used to work construction with in Buffalo. He was hiding in a scummy little motel outside of Erie, living under a fake name, thinking he could wait them out. I didn't call him. I didn't warn him. Instead, I sent a message. Not to him, to them. It was easy once I found the right burner forums. Turns out, when people want you bad enough, they post rewards. I gave them the tip they needed: name, motel, room number, everything. I wrote one sentence: family reunion. Room 27. Then I smashed that burner too. The next night, while sitting in the dark of that dusty rental house, I got a text from Mike. No words, just a link to a news story. Motel fire under investigation. 2 dead. The article didn't name names yet, but I didn't need them to. I knew. Brian was gone. I should have felt guilty. Hell, maybe a better man would have. But all I felt was free. For the first time since that Christmas night, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waking up in a cold sweat. I wasn't checking locks twice before bed. I moved out of the rental. Got a new apartment under a different name. New job. New everything. Like shedding an old, rotten skin. But life has a funny way of keeping receipts. About a month later, I got a plain white envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photo. It was me, standing outside the motel where Brian had been hiding. Taken from a distance. Behind me, you could barely see the edge of the sign for room 27. No note. No message. Just the photo. Proof someone knew what I had done. At first, panic gripped me again. I checked every door, every window. I barely slept, waiting for the hammer to fall. But days passed. Then weeks. Then months. Nothing happened. It hit me one night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling. This wasn't a threat. It was a warning. A final reminder. That in their world, mistakes get paid for one way or another. And that while they were done with Brian, they would never completely forget about me. I made my choice. I saved myself. But I stained my hands in the process. Every Christmas since, when the snow falls heavy and the streets go silent, I remember that night. I remember sitting cold and alone while my family laughed around a table, pretending I didn't exist. I remember Brian's voice crying and begging at my door. And most of all, I remember that there are worse things than being alone. There are worse things than betrayal. There's being part of a family where everyone smiles at you until the moment they decide you're not worth saving.